Hello, welcome to Herp Corner, where we'll be discussing the Gidgee Skink, also known as the Gidgee spiny-tailed skink, Stoke's skink, and, in German, Stachelschwanz skink. Yes, they can grow anywhere from 10 to 12 inches, or 25 to 30 centimeters, and live up to 25 years in captivity, though in the wild they'd probably only live for 5. These big dumpies are brown with small black and white speckles throughout their bodies. They're not particularly beautiful or anything, but what they don't have in looks, they've got in charm. Small stubby limbs and a big fat flat tail in the shape of a scary pine cone. Speaking of tails, they don't drop theirs. Most lizards are able to drop their tails as a defense mechanism against predators. Functionally, it's a distraction. A lot of keepers don't like it when a lizard drops his tail for a few reasons. Number 1, it can be a little startling. Number 2, the lizard often won't look the same afterwards. And number 3, their tails also function as a storage unit for excess nutrients and fats. When they lose their tails, they lose access to those nutrients. Though, of course, that isn't that bad of an issue in captivity, since we already feed them on a consistent basis. It can still bother some keepers. The fact that Gidgee skinks don't lose their tails often makes handling a lot less nerve-wracking, since you don't have to worry about them getting startled as much. Aside from that, their sharp faces hold a permanently serious expression, with hard scales blocking their ear holes to prevent sand from falling in when burrowing. You can barely tell since their eyes are dark brown, but Gidgee skinks are diurnal, often spending most hours basking in the hot sun during the day. Though they're mostly fossorial, meaning they're competent burrowers, they possess the ability to climb. Though that ability is limited, their sharp claws are very effective when it comes to digging into tree bark. Their claws are not as sharp as, for instance, a savanna monitor's, but they're still pretty fine. The Gidgee skink was discovered by John Edward Gray in 1845. They're primarily found in Australia, specifically everywhere in Australia except Melbourne and Tasmania. Their main habitats consist of Australian shrublands, Australian grasslands, woodlands, and rocky outcrops. They mainly hide under piles of lumber and sometimes garbage. They're often referred to as a shy species because of their secluded nature. Aww. With due reason, of course. Gidgee skinks often fall prey to many predators, including dingoes, monitors, outside cats, birds of prey, and foxes, which, if you want to help these skinks out at home, and maybe like 72 other species of birds, and you happen to live in Australia, how about you keep your cats indoors? You know what? Even if you don't live in Australia, feel free to look into the damage that outside cats cause to the general world's ecology. But that's for another day. Aside from that, they're sometimes seen with a tick known as Amblyomma vikirri, which is a parasitic insect that tends to reside in rocky areas. They attach to the area around the skinks' ear holes. The IUCN Red List marks the species as least concern. Nice! Though their population is decreasing. That's definitely due to land clearing. Thankfully, those have been isolated instances, though, it still cause for some concern. These guys love it hot. Thanks, Reptile Magazine. So true. They're right, though. The most notable part of the Gidgee skink's care is definitely the temperature of the enclosure. I mean, they're from Australia. The basking spot should be around 115 degrees Fahrenheit, or 46 degrees Celsius, give or take. The cool side of the enclosure should be around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, or 26 degrees Celsius. Since they're diurnal and tend to bask in the wild, you're going to have to provide them with some kind of UVB light. Heat pads won't work unless their enclosure is near some sort of open window where a bunch of sunlight comes in. But even then, isn't it just easier to use a lamp? I mean, I think it's worth noting that for desert enclosures, I don't think you need to go bioactive. I mean, I'm not entirely sure how you'd even be able to do that, since the majority of bioactive terrariums I've seen are humid and exotic. Just so long as the enclosure itself is dry, has a sandy substrate, and has plenty of enrichment and places to hide, your skink will be perfectly content. Feel free to attempt to house desert plants in here, like succulents and cactuses and all that. I can't help you with that, though. But what I can help you with is getting the nice decor for real cheap. Look, I promise this is related, but at one point, my brother used to do drop shipping, right? He used to find things on AliExpress and sell them for higher prices on Amazon, I think. And at some point, I'm pretty sure, someone ordered this big bag of fake desert plants, but canceled their order halfway through. So my brother already ordered and received the little plastic things, but they didn't have a home to go to. So here's the thing. I had, and still have, a Kenyan samboa that, at the time, could use some more decor. So to this day, her enclosure is thoroughly decorated with some very wonderful, very cheap plastic succulents. Some of them cover a decent amount of ground. So what's the moral of the story? You don't need to drive all the way over to Petco or look on Amazon for a small bag of leaves that'll cost you like $15. Look at all these nice decorations you can get for less than $7. Not sponsored. Of course, do note the fact that it can take a few weeks for your AliExpress package to come in. But, you know, it's worth the money. For the actual hides and things in the enclosure, you can always use Zoomed's excavator clay to sculpt tunnels and rocks, things for them to climb and hide in. It can produce some really unique looking enclosures. Hey, Zoomed, whenever you want to sponsor me, you know, I'm here. Anyway, Gidgee skinks can be fed similarly to the blue-tongued skink, just scaled down. Blue tongues are known for their diverse taste in food. Gidgee skinks have as much of a palate. Feed them a varied diet with equal parts protein, fruits, and vegetables. I don't know how accurate the blue-tongued skink dietary ratio that's usually thrown around is, but if it's still a good way to assess portions, then I personally don't see any reason not to use it for Gidgee skinks as well. Repticalcium with D3 dusted on top of whatever you give them is always good. Just make sure to avoid feeding them kale, spinach, broccoli, cabbage, and romaine lettuce, specifically in large quantities, since they have minerals in them that can make it difficult for the skink to absorb calcium. Cohabiting for this species has been done successfully. Actually, you're gonna like this. Gidgee skinks are some of the few reptile species that have been found to congregate in the wild. They'll live in familial groups that defend their own territory, so if you do choose to cohabit, pay close attention to how the skinks feel about each other. Same-sex cohabiting is alright, just, you know, they're more likely to be non-compatible. If you put two randos in an enclosure, they'll see the other as a threat. There are a few ways to combat this. You could try. The simplest one is to only cohabitate two specimens that came from the same clutch, since they knew each other from birth. Though even then, there are many pros and cons to cohabitation at all, so tread lightly. Handling for the Gidgee skink is really, really good. They're incredibly mellow and docile, hardly moving at all when you hold them. Honestly, handling them is comparable to handling a bearded dragon. They're just such a nice species. Anyway, any monogamy fans out there will appreciate this one. The Gidgee skink has been found to, in the wild, only father one litter. Females will seek out multiple mates per year, but only once per season. They reach sexual maturity when they're at 6 inches, giving birth to a litter of 1 to 8 babies. And yes, I do mean give birth. This is another viviparous species, meaning you won't have to worry about incubating any eggs if you breed them. Before labor, a gravid or pregnant female will experience contractions for 40 minutes. The gestation is unknown, but the full birth process can take upwards of 2 days. That's all that's super heavily documented on the breeding process. Thankfully, due to Australia being tough on exporters, there's very little issue with wild-caught Gidgee skinks being sold. Therefore, this is one of the few species that I'll happily recommend to any intermediate keeper, breeder or not. Though, if you are a breeder, then this could serve as a real nice project for you. Considering there's a high demand for Gidgee skinks, but barely anyone breeds them. The only fellas I've seen breed these guys would be imperial reptiles and exotics for $700. So, any reptile breeders out there looking for a species with low supply and high demand, hey, how's it going? Unfortunately, there's no morph market for these fellas, though there are a few different subspecies on the market. There's Egernia stokesii buddea, Egernia stokesii, and Egernia stokesii zalindi. Very fun. All equally personable, though some have more documentation than others. I don't suspect that the care is particularly different depending on the skink. I think that's going to be it for this installment of Herp Corner. As always, sources will be in the description. If you're interested in this topic, I'd recommend looking further into their husbandry or history. Oh, and if you like what I do, and know a specific reptile or amphibian you'd like to see me cover, put it in the comments. There's only so many animals I know off the top of my head. If you learned something new with this one, feel free to subscribe. I do these every other week. Like the video to support the channel. Have a good evening, morning, or afternoon. Thank you for listening, watching, whatever, and I'll see you next time.